Okay, so I'm going to give you an update on highly pathogenic avian influenza. And the first thing we need to think about is, where do flu viruses come from? So most of you know that the natural reservoir for flu viruses are wild waterfowl. They have 16 hemagglutinin types, so H1 through H16, and 9 different neuraminidase types, so H1, N1, all the way up to H16, N9. So there's lots and lots of different possibilities, and actually there's been detected in that wild waterfowl host 105 different subtypes of virus. Those viruses are sometimes introduced into turkeys, as you well know, and into chickens. And there's 31 different subtypes that have been identified in those species. And H5 and H7, if you look back over the years of introductions in this state and in other places, those are not all that uncommon to find in domestic poultry. Oop, that went backwards. So once introduced into a domestic poultry flock, those viruses begin to change. And so every time an influenza virus infects a new host, when it goes from either human to human to human, or turkey to turkey to turkey, or chicken to chicken to chicken, that virus changes a little bit. And it changes to become, it has different characters. And one of the characters it can acquire is to become highly pathogenic. I'm not going to tell you what that means, because I think everybody's familiar with what highly pathogenic avian influenza is now. So highly pathogenic avian influenza can emerge from the viruses that fly around in our waterfowl overhead, okay? And that is what happened in DuBois County in Indiana. So they had an introduction of a low pathogenicity H7N9 virus, and it went undetected, which is easy to do, right? Those of you who've lived around turkeys know it's easy for it to go undetected unless you're doing a lot of surveillance for it. 9 farms had low path H7N8 in Indiana, and 1 farm had a high path H7N8. So event over time, and with that passage, that virus became highly pathogenic. So the other way, so that's how high path AI can emerge, and it has emerged and did emerge in 2016. So that was back at the beginning of the year. High path AI can also come from other reservoirs. Okay, this is a demonstration farm in southern China. It's built by the government of China. The houses with the red roofs hold mallard ducks. Okay, so those mallard duck eggs are collected from the shores of Poyang Lake. Poyang Lake is just on the other side of that berm behind those buildings. Okay, it's a very large lake in southern China with lots and lots of waterfowl that come there. The eggs from the mallards are collected there. You know how to do this. And they're raised for generations in those houses, and they become flightless over time, okay? They're raised half in the water and half out of the water with those houses for shelter. It's a continuous flow system. So in addition to that, on the other side of that berm, as I mentioned, Poyang Lake, these geese are set free every day from that farm, and they fly over that berm to feed and scavenge all day at the lake. And at night, they fly back over and are in that pond with continuous water to those ducks. On the other side of that, behind me, were rice paddies, where free-flying waterfowl were also coming. So you've got a complete integration of domestic animal production with waterfowl, wild waterfowl. So this is another major source. And you might ask, why do they do this? Why? The Chinese consumer values wild meat, wild sourced meat. So this is what is driving this. Just like here in the US, your consumer is buying a different type of management for egg production. Just like your consumer is going to drive other management decisions. This is what is driving this. Okay? So how can this happen? Well, we saw it last year, right? So the virus that infected farms here in 2015 came out of Asia, came out of China, no doubt in my mind, went up to in wild waterfowl. Over many years of that contact, that virus changing every time it passes to a new bird and acquiring new characteristics, acquired the ability to infect and move in migrating birds. And that's what it did. It went up to the breeding area in that area way north of the Arctic Circle called Beringia, where it circulated and came down in several places, including into Europe, causing outbreaks, and along the west coast of North America. And the first we knew about it was this outbreak among our friends in the Fraser Valley of British Columbia, end of November, December 2014. They quickly eradicated the infection, but during that time, the virus was also in ducks. So another way that this virus changes, not only just little changes as it is passage through host after host, it also can do this thing called reassortment. And that's just sort of like shuffling a deck of cards, shuffling two decks together. There's 8 segments in each virus. And when there's more than one virus in a host, new viruses come out at the end. So here I'm showing you an H5N1 and an H9N2 that got shuffled together and came out as an H5N2. That's what happened on the west coast of the United States and Canada, where H5N8 reassorted with North American avian influenza viruses, probably in ducks, and came out as H5N2. The virus that came then to the middle of the country came either through the movement of wild birds or through the movements of humans. Still and yet, we don't know that answer for sure. We don't have the data on the wild birds, but I hope you're all working with everyone you know to make sure that it couldn't possibly ever be human movement again. We then had the largest outbreak of a foreign animal disease in U.S. history. Devastating, difficult. And where we are today. So, HPAI, a very similar virus to the one detected and first in Washington State, that then caused the outbreak here, was detected in Alaska. The bird was sampled on August 12th during a normal routine bird banding operation. There was nothing noted about the bird being not healthy. Since it was banding, it was let go. And later, HPAI was detected. So why this year? I thought it was gone. Who thought it was gone? Raise your hand. Come on. Really? Nobody thought it was gone? Dang it. I thought you'd all think it was gone. Okay, so why this year? Why not last year? Last year, everybody went nuts in the fall, saying, it's got to be here. We're going to find it. So we sampled lots and lots of birds, couldn't find it. Now this year, we're sampling fewer birds because we were more confident it was gone. But wait a minute. If we look back at the literature, we know that, and I'm just showing two viral subtypes here, H5s and H7s. Okay, this happens with most of the viral subtypes. A little bit, there's some cross neutralization, but we'll just say it happens with every subtype. In ducks, in 1 year you'll have a high prevalence, a lot of that subtype. The next year you have a valley, very little detectable. The next year after that, it comes back up, back down, back up, every other year like that, and every other year cycle. Well, why is that? It's the antibodies. So if ducks are infected, they will develop antibodies because they live through high pathai. Turkeys don't ever develop antibodies to high pathai because they die. Neither do chickens, but ducks do, okay? So once they develop antibodies, they pass the antibodies to their ducklings through the egg, right? Maternal antibodies. The ducklings are then protected. We think that's why they don't get that infection the second year. Or sorry, not infected, they're protected. They have antibodies. The year after that, those ducklings don't get antibodies, and they're completely susceptible to infection. So there's a small amount of infection that's happening in those off years, and that perpetuates the infection cycle to every other year, okay? So what can you expect? Well, it's in the ducks this year. Could it come here in the fall? Sure. Could it come here in the spring? Sure. We know the seasons when there's risk. September 15 to December 15 is pretty close to what we think. March 15 to June 15 in the spring is pretty close to what we think. Surveillance is in place to detect introductions early. So many of you have done water sampling in addition to your NPIP sampling. That's because you're looking for this early introduction. The response is planned and ready to make any event a one-off. Dale and the group at the Board of Animal Health has worked very hard to make sure that that 24-hour thing happens. And that makes the neighborhood better for everyone. So, is your biosecurity ready? I hope so. All right, I just want to flash through these quickly. Let's take a look at January 2013 to January 2014. These are OIE detections of H5s and H7s. Most of them are H5 lineage viruses, high pathai. I want you to keep an eye on China and Asia. So classically, China doesn't report many of their outbreaks in high pathai, but you see the activity that's going on in China when there's outbreaks in Taiwan, Japan, and Korea. So you'll see that sort of coastal area light up. Keep an eye over here on Mexico. Nigeria, which at that time had eradicated high pathai. Egypt, which many human health experts think will be the next source of the next pandemic, and Western Europe. So here's where our outbreak in the Fraser Valley happened. You can see that happening. Mexico is now reporting no cases. Nigeria had its introduction of high pathai. Western Europe's free, and Egypt is not reporting anything. And look at how Asia is lighting up, just lighting up. All right, now, 2 years later, much more intense. And you can see the United States is all green. That's all about resolution. And you can see Asia still lit up, and Nigeria and Western Africa are expanding. You can see now that France is lighting up pretty well, and Egypt is back to being a hot spot. Mexico, a continuing threat. Finally, most recent, Mexico. Mexico is not reporting very many outbreaks or very many cases, but if you ask our friends in allied industry, they'll let you know that vaccine sales are robust. That tells you something. Nigeria, I think you can expect to see activity and the potential for evolution of high pathogenic viruses out of West Africa. It's been named as a top site with having all the conditions necessary to produce new threats to the globe out of West Africa. You can see Egypt is continuing to be active, and France is still struggling mightily. They're struggling particularly with their duck production in Western France and southwestern France. And Asia's just a constant. So with that, I'm happy to entertain any questions or hear your comments. Any questions? Was I supposed to say that there was nothing out there? It's okay. Yeah, Dale. What types of influenza? Mexico is an H7N3 high pathogenic situation, and it's, you know, don't kid yourself. It's not under control, and it's expanding, and it's not a great situation. So they had H5N2 in the past, and this time it's an H7 though. And it's according to my colleagues, it's in everything: broilers, layers, backyards, everything. Yeah, Kim. Is that coming from the Pacific Flyway then, the Mexico? The Mexico, yeah. So how? I'm going to answer two questions. So first of all, yes, the virus was North American when it evolved. Okay, so it's been several years now. So it does not, this high pathogenic in Mexico has not gained the ability to go back into wild birds in the high path form and be transmitted to other poultry. So is that something that's going to come through the flyway to infect your birds? Unlikely. The transmission route from Mexico is going to be people, right? People. Okay. Other questions? Yeah.
Bioterrorism could be a significant source of spread. Would you agree?
So the question was, people think that bioterrorism might spread this virus. And I would say that it looks to me like, you know, we did a pretty good job ourselves. So certainly, though, you know, is this a vulnerable point in our ag systems? And I think maybe perhaps it is, or it was. You know, I think you've put a lot of things in place now that make this particular sector of agriculture less vulnerable. So, you know, could it happen through a purposeful introduction? Sure. But I think there's so much ability. This virus is very capable on its own. It almost doesn't need that help, you know. So my thoughts are that this virus came here to our North American shores through the movements of wild migratory birds. I think wild migratory birds were significantly involved, perhaps not the only way that it moved into our area, but significantly involved. I think that there was plenty of farm-to-farm spread that happened once the virus was in our region and once, systems got overwhelmed. So I think we've made a lot of improvements in the things that we can improve. I think we have yet to really conquer as an industry, either from introductions through bioterrorism or introductions from a distant location where they're breeding these viruses to have new characteristics, like in China, how we live in that world. We now know that the distance we are from those locations isn't enough. So whether it's bioterrorism or wild birds, it's a new threat. And I do believe, though, that your biosecurity can work. I know it can. I saw a number of you didn't get infected. Outstanding, right? So I know it can work. All right, so our next speaker is going to be Dale Lauer, who really needs no introduction, but he's going to tell us about another scary thing in our midst.
As if you didn't have enough to worry about, I've been asked to talk a little bit about the Newcastle disease that has been identified in cormorants about a month ago, as well as a NPIP update and MPTL, kind of what's going on. So for the folks in Melrose and those on online, you can kind of see the first slide is talking about Newcastle disease, and a disease that another viral disease, as if you didn't have enough to worry about, causes some problems in poultry flocks, not only turkeys, chickens, other types of poultry, and is often a disease that we commonly vaccinate for, causing egg production drops, respiratory signs, that kind of thing. However, there's eventually, just as Carol indicated with influenza, this disease can become more pathogenic, become more of a problem, become a killer in our poultry flocks. And so as she can describe probably for hours what they did in California with exotic Newcastle disease is a term that's used for the disease when it's identified in domestic poultry. Well, this past summer, as we have in many different summers in Minnesota, experienced a die-off in cormorants. This has been reported to us from the DNR here in the state, as well as the U.S. Fisheries and Wildlife Service. They do a lot of surveillance. They help do the mortality, that kind of thing. Cormorants are highly susceptible to this Newcastle virus, and we have seen it in the past. We've seen it in 2008, 12, 14. This is our year, 2016. And most recently, when we did identify it in 2014, it was identified in Meeker County. So Pigeon Lake, which is in Meeker County, right next Dassel, Highway 12, Highway 15, is where it was identified in the past. And for the most part, it's probably not a huge deal for poultry producers because I think our biosecurity is adequate to handle it. I think that it comes at a time of the year, typically July, August, when we're able to handle it. However, my concern from where I sit is what do they do with the carcasses? What do they do with the mortality? How do they handle it? Are they moving it out of the county? Is it staying in their county? Are they incinerating the birds on site? You know exactly what is their policy. And so we've really tried, or at least I, from the board standpoint, have really tried to make sure that that mortality and the traffic is really pretty limited. In 1992, it became a much bigger event when they had over 35,000 birds that died in the Great Lakes, upper Midwest, in Canada. And so these can become really significant mortality events in some of our wild bird populations. And it even has been identified, these migrations through Minnesota in North Dakota. If some of you who have been around long enough can remember a North Dakota flock in the mid-90s that was identified with exotic Newcastle disease, and it was very quickly depopulated in that case. So I've got a slide for the viewers here that kind of talks about some of the migratory patterns that we see with cormorants, and it certainly is unique for cormorants. It is not exactly similar to the avian influenza migration in wild birds. It's a little bit more of a central Canadian type migration, and certainly not up the Pacific Flyway and into Alaska. Well, I'm looking at a nice, beautiful, colorful slide, Rick. Well, yeah, I think I'll leave that up to you and Dr. Cardona. But anyway, the migratory patterns, the way it travels, the way the virus travels is a little bit different from influenza. In 2016, we identified 3 different locations in Minnesota where we identified these cormorant die-offs. In Mille Lacs County, I know there's not a lot of poultry up there, but they did identify it where they had approximately 100 of these cormorants, 150 that have died. In Pope County, Lake Johanna, and I don't know if people are familiar with that, where they had another cormorant die-off, as well as Rice County, and that was Lake Seneca. And so all of those cases, all of those situations were where they send the carcasses actually to the wildlife laboratory in Madison, Wisconsin. That's where they do all of their diagnostic work. That's where they isolate all of the viruses. And then if they do identify them, they go to NBSL. And so in those particular counties, they did identify this velogenic virulent Newcastle disease, or as I said before, exotic Newcastle disease in domestic poultry. All of those birds were tested for avian influenza, and all of them were negative. And so again, with that being said, and the die-offs that were reported in wild birds, there have been no other additional reports of die-offs since August 3rd, 2016. Okay, so that's kind of it, and I think that's probably the end, at least I hope, for Newcastle disease in 2016. Questions? I think sometimes we have bigger fish to fry than that, but anyway, that's kind of one of the things that we were able to kind of get through in 2016. When we did identify some of these premises, we were able to work with MINIT, which is the Minnesota Information Technology Group, and we put together a type of a mapping program. And since you guys can't see it here in Wilmer, probably not going to show it, but we do have the ability and we do have the capability to map some of these locations, put in and populate with our poultry premises that we have identified here in the state. And that's where Clara's work, as far as making sure that all the premises are right, that they have a national ID number, really comes into play, especially when we're trying to identify positive premises and this whole permitted movement that we were involved with last year. So that's kind of the Newcastle disease update. Are there any questions? Any questions from Melrose? You know, so the question is, why is this a July-August type situation? Number one, I don't know for sure because I'm not a wildlife guy. I think it's kind of the nesting activity of the cormorants, possibly has something to do with it. But I would say that every other year when we've identified it, it has always been July, August. Always been July, August. And possibly it's increased activity by the conservation officers. Maybe they're going around checking more. I really don't know. But we did actually had a couple of other cases that were reported to us from the DNR, and they did identify avian paramyxovirus 1, but it was not the virulent strain. So it seems like these viruses do circulate through these populations quite easily and quite frequently. Okay. Nothing from Melrose?
Nope.
Okay. Second topic I was asked to talk about briefly was the NPIP. So for most of you maybe know, and most of you should know, the NPIP stands for the National Poultry Improvement Plan, program that involves our processing plants, hatcheries, breeder flocks, and more recently all of our commercial flocks that are sending birds to the processing plant. We had our biennial conference here about 2-3 weeks ago, in which all the delegates from across the country come together. We probably had about 300 people that were attending this event. And what we do at that is put together and look at some of the different proposed changes to the NPIP provisions, as well as the program standards. We had we had a good delegation that showed up from Minnesota, some of the people in this room, Dr. Cardona, Dr. Weilman, Dr. Nizworski, Steve Olson, myself, as well as a number of other people who represented the Minnesota poultry industry. A couple of things that came out of that after we thrashed through 41 of the different proposed changes that came before the delegates. One of them was this compartmentalization concept that was established for primary breeders throughout in the United States. And basically what this does, it sets up a separate compartment for the primary breeders, the primary breeder companies, so that they can continue their business in the face of a disease event, most significantly high path avian influenza. So as you may or may not be aware, the primary breeders send their breeding stock throughout the world, nationally, internationally, and so this influenza event last year really crippled them as far as trade, and I think it actually crippled some of the industries throughout the world because you simply could not get stock there, hatching eggs, chicks, you name it, because of our high path event. This compartmentalization concept has been in the works for about 10 years. It had received interim approval and now more recently got kind of final approval at this biennial conference. That's a big deal. It's one of the first things that's ever happened in livestock commodities in the United States. So that's one thing. The second thing that came up that I think was, go ahead, Carol. Carol has a comment.
My question is, for the compartmentalization, how would that impact the potential to vaccinate during an outbreak?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what I'm.
So I think compartmentalization allows the primary breeders to not be part of the same compartment that is vaccinating. So the primary breeders were one of the major reasons that we weren't vaccinating, and so it kind of separates out and allows the commercial poultry industry to deal with an outbreak.
So certainly they operate as a very specialized single compartment all by themselves. And so they've got biosecurity standards, they've got testing standards that certainly are above and beyond the NPIP norm. So, but again, it's a big deal and it's a trade thing, and I'm glad it went through. The second thing that was significant as far as the NPIP biennial conference was the use of PCR testing in NPIP laboratories. So prior to 2016, there's been a lot of conversation between NPIP laboratories, state veterinarians, official state agencies of the NPIP about the use of PCR testing, which usually has been restricted to non-labs, which would be state university laboratories. At the biennial conference, and since this has been kicked around a lot, it has been at NPIP, it's been at USAHA. They finally came through with a proposal that had a few caveats, but at least it would allow some PCR testing in certain NPIP laboratories, again, primarily for the primary breeders, to use the PCR testing as additional surveillance. So that was a good thing, okay? Biosecurity principles, I'm going to talk about it in my next slide or a little bit. But the other thing that was very significant is that there's a committee that kind of oversees the activities of the NPIP, and they work very closely with the national office in Conyers, Georgia. They work very closely with USDA as far as making the NPIP go. And this year, because of the election cycle, we were able to elect new members to the General Conference Committee from our West North Central region, and we were very happy that we had two of our own from Minnesota that were elected as member and alternate to the GCC. Our new GCC member is Dr. Jill Nizworski, and she's with us today. And the alternate for that for our region is Dr. Ben Weilman. It's a big deal because now we, in a sense, have those folks right with us, and they can keep us plugged in. They can keep us tuned in to what's going on with the NPIP, different changes, different program standards, you know, that whole deal. And so the West North Central region includes Minnesota, Dakotas, Iowa, Nebraska, Missouri, and Kansas. So out of all of those states, we got the two of them right here in Minnesota. So I think that's a real plus for Minnesota. It really is a big deal. And then the last thing that I'm going to touch upon, and you've heard a lot of conversation about already, are the biosecurity principles that were approved by the delegates at the biennial conference this year. And this is a direct fallout, or this is a direct result of indemnity being tied to biosecurity for poultry producers in the United States. I think that when Claire was talking about being prepared and flock agreements and all that kind of stuff and indemnity, one of the first questions they're going to ask, if God forbid this ever happens again to us in this state or to any producers in this upper Midwest, is number one, they're going to ask you, do you have a biosecurity plan in place? They're not going to ask you for the document. They're not going to ask you, show it to me. They're not going to ask you, can you rattle off the 14 different components of the biosecurity program? They're going to say, do you have a biosecurity program in place? And my suggestion to you is to say yes. Please say yes. Because if you don't, you're going to run into a few snafus. So just say yes. We can work out the details. And that's what we're actually doing right now, is we're working on these different biosecurity principles. There's 14 different points that are involved with these principles. I don't have enough time to go through them all, but basically they're asking, do you have a biosecurity coordinator? Is there training for your employees? Do you understand what a line of separation is? Do you understand what a perimeter buffer area is? How do you control your traffic? Kind of a written protocol. How do you control your traffic? How about sanitation? How are you keeping wild birds out? How about insects, rodents, mortality? How do you report your mortality? All of these different components are things that need to come under your biosecurity plan, your biosecurity program for, as we've got it defined now, NPIP participants. That doesn't mean that we're going to run down the road and audit every farm, but there is an auditing component that is part of these biosecurity principles. And because we had the USDA officials with us at the biennial conference, I don't think there was any way that we were going to get out of the biennial conference without some type of auditing component to these biosecurity principles. The bottom line in the message that USDA has received is that the federal government is not going to put another $1 billion forward for another HPAI event. Bottom line. So I don't think it's insurmountable. I think we can work through it. I think that these, as designed, are minimum standards. They fall under the responsibility of the official state agency, not somebody in Riverdale, not somebody out there. It's going to fall on the backs of the official state agencies, so that means you'll have to work with me again. Sorry about that, but you'll have to work with me again on this. It's going to require, however, that we report some of this information to the NPIP office. There is going to be kind of a pass-fail procedure. There's going to be a auditing process, and they're still kind of working on that. So more to come, to be continued, and I think I'll probably just leave it at that. But that really is a big deal. It really is. So we got any questions on the NPIP? Steve, Carol, you have any comments? Jill, do you have any comments on NPIP? Got the mic in front of you.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so everybody's panicking about the biosecurity part of this. As written, it shouldn't be hard for most farms to comply with. Once we get some more details hashed out, we'll disseminate the info, but pretty much everybody should be able to handle it. So.
Okay, any questions, Melrose, on NPIP? Abby, anybody online?
They're all brightly shaking their heads no, they don't have any questions.
Yeah, they want to get done by 2:45. I get it. I know. Okay, the last thing that I was asked to talk about, just very briefly, and then I'll let you guys go, is that as most of you should know, sometimes there's pain before things get better. And last year we all went through a very painful event. We know that. However, one of the things that I think was a real plus for not me, not for Dr. Voss, not for anybody at the MPTL, but for the Minnesota poultry industry, is that we got the state government to kick in some money for a renovated MPTL. And I think, folks, you're going to really like it. I know we already do, just based on the couple of weeks that we've been there, we certainly don't have things well organized. And certainly, for those who are looking at the slides, you can see that we've been in a number of different facilities. We've had a number of different expansions and renovations for our site. I think what's important for the industry to know is that this is a cooperative venture between the University of Minnesota and the Board of Animal Health. And I hope that moving forward it stays that way, because as we look at this university building, we look at how the university is going to maintain this. We look at how they help us maintain our national accreditation standards. We've now going to be able to do necropsies and additional PCR testing in this laboratory, in addition to our regular salmonella serotyping and other tests that we do. We form a very good match with McRock, the building that you're in right now. So I think we've got a critical mass that is being established here in Minnesota, and that isn't to shut out the Board of Animal Health and the stuff that we do. I think it's a very good team effort. I think that this one-stop shop program, that if I can call it that, where we are able to do regulatory as well as diagnostic testing, is really a good thing, as well as collaborate and track poultry diseases with our colleagues here at McRock, I think is really going to be a good thing for our poultry industry. So what I would like to just remind everybody that with this $8.5 million expansion and renovation, we went from about 3,600 square feet to almost 12,000. We really increased our size. We realized that given the way this project was designed, this kind of design process, and how quickly we had to get into it because we're getting ready for bird flu in fall of 2016. We moved very quickly on this whole project. But we are in, construction is complete, and I want to make sure that if you haven't, and I know that we've got a lot of people that we had to invite, and I know that a lot of people were on the invite list, and I know that we missed a lot of people. But we are having an open house on September 22nd. And even Governor Dayton is going to be showing up. So if you have anything for, no, come on, no, guys and girls, no, come on. Just hold your enthusiasm. Come on. I'll just tell you one thing. If without Governor Dayton's support, that lab wouldn't be there. Okay, he did recognize that we needed a lab. He realized that we were in tight space. He probably had a very aggressive timeline, however, but without his signature, that wouldn't have happened. It was one of two projects that happened last year: the isolation facility in St. Paul and the MPTL. So, regardless of your political viewpoint, I'm very happy that we were able to make this happen. So, September 22nd, open house or grand opening in the afternoon. There's going to be a program at 2 o'clock. Tours are going to be from 3 to 5. But if you miss the boat on the 22nd, or you're out of town, or you've got something else going on, we certainly will be open for business and will entertain visitors and people who are interested in the poultry industry as far as what the MPTL is all about. So,
Dale, there's a question about a new diagnostician.
Yep. So with our expanded MPTL, we have, of course, been able to hire additional personnel to do the testing at MPTL. One of those additions includes a veterinarian who will serve as our diagnostician. And I think between myself and Dr. Voss doing the regulatory programs and that kind of stuff, this person is intended to serve as a diagnostician for poultry producers throughout the state, help supplement and help to support our other industry veterinarians, and I think that's a really good fit, as well as kind of work with our staff for expanded testing, whether it be BACT, serologic, PCR testing, whatever the diagnostician is going to require. And certainly he or she will be included as part of our team at the MPTL. It's certainly going to be a group effort to help support the poultry industry. And we're really pretty excited. We did conduct some interviews. I believe an offer was sent out, and I'm not sure that I haven't heard as far as a response, but I thought we had two excellent candidates from a field of about 15 that we went through to add to the MPTL staff. We also added 3 PCR technicians so that they are able to perform the AI PCR test. They were in St. Paul since June, and so they've spent 3 months in the Twin Cities training. And so, of course, we have to get equipment calibrated. We have to get pipettes, pipetters. We have to get hoods certified. We've got a lot of stuff that we have to get done before we're able to do that full speed, but certainly I think we're well on our way for that. Yes.
Are there other questions for Dale? I have one other thing. Abby, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. The university is working with DNR and U.S. Fish and Wildlife on a gull study to look at whether high path is prevalent in gulls, and they're looking for cooperators. So if you have gulls near your turkey farms, let us know, and we're looking for those cooperators yet this fall, as well as next late winter, spring.
Super. Any questions here? Closing comments, Mr. Olson?
Again, we're looking for feedback on this. We'll work on the technical issues, and we'll get those straightened out for next time. We're looking for topics, so again, funnel those through Abby, Erica, or myself in the MTGA and CEAM office. And other than that, again, thanks for your participation today.